Greetings, fellow traveller. Tired of the hardships of your journey? Here, take a seat by the fire and let me spin you a grim tale of a dark future where there is only war. Today, I shall tell you of the human civilizations that survived the galactic catastrophe known as the Old Night. Those societies that, be it thanks to holding on to STCs and technologies of the Dark Age, or by coexisting with the more peaceful kinds of Xenos, rose from the ashes and established themselves as independent galactic powers. There is a long list of such civilizations, however I'm going to focus on those that I believe to be more interesting. Also, I won't be going over the civilizations on the primarchs' homeworlds because that would take forever, and we won't be talking about the societies that lived on the different planets of the solar system either, since I believe both of those topics deserve their own separate videos. Now, even excluding these, there is still quite an extensive list, so much so that we're going to split this video into 3 parts. So basically, we're going to focus on the independent human factions spread out through the galaxy that the Imperium of Man discovered during the Great Crusade. And spoiler alert, it didn't really go well for any of them, since, as you well know, the Imperium only offers 2 choices: join me or be destroyed. Most of you will know of the Interex, Diasporex, and the Oretian technocracy, and yes, we will be covering them one at the end of each video. However, there are so many more interesting independent human civilizations out there that we seem to overlook. And before we start, I should also warn you that there is no art at all for almost any of these civilizations, so I confess I've been forced to use abominable intelligence to make some images for certain parts. I hope the Emperor in his infinite wisdom will forgive me for my heresy. And sure, go ahead and call the Inquisition if you will. I'll be well gone on my bike by the time they arrive. Anyway, that's enough ranting, isn't it? Let's get into the lore. The Black Judges were a group of warlords from Old Night who survived until the time of the Great Crusade as self-proclaimed judges of human purity, life, and death. Their technology was quite advanced, possessing relics from the Dark Age that would allow them to build spaceships capable of warp travel, among other things. In addition, the Black Judges also used technology from the Dark Age to extend their lives for millennia by absorbing fresh human genetic material from a living subject. Despite extending their lives, this process would ultimately turn them into shriveled and deformed creatures. And in case you were wondering, yeah, this feeding process was agonizing for the victims who suffered it, and at the end of the process, they would die. Having such weak bodies, the Black Judges wore mechanized armor controlled by cybernetic implants that was immune to bolter fire, with weapons that were on par to those of a dreadnought. This charming society was based on a hollowed-out moon known as the Rock of Judgment, from where they travelled with their powerful fleet to different worlds in the Meritara cluster to plunder planets, take slaves, and on occasion would offer protection against Xenos in exchange for a tribute of healthy subjects who would be used as livestock to extend the lives of the Black Judges. Nice to see that good old extortion survived the Old Night, eh? Within the depths of the Rock of Judgment, the Black Judges ruled from enormous obsidian citadels known as the Night Courts and had a large number of genetically engineered slaves at their disposal, as well as a great host of accusators who served as their main armed forces. This friendly independent human civilization would be crushed by none other than Perturabo and the Iron Warriors in their first campaign, since the Primarch had heard legends of the Black Judges on Olympia who had massacred and enslaved tens of thousands on their last visit to the planet. Having just received an entire legion of Space Marines and an expeditionary fleet at his disposal, Perturabo decided that he would seek revenge against the Black Judges for their crimes against his people. But perhaps not purely out of sympathy for the Olympians, but maybe more because he just got his legion and he wanted to smash something with it. In the Void Battle, the Iron Warriors lost a dozen battle barges and 20 attack cruisers, which is of itself a testament to the power of the Black Judges' fleet. Upon boarding the moon, the true battle began. The hordes of accusators carried chain hammers that could pierce even Space Marine power armor, and the neutron beam batteries that punished the ranks of the Iron Warriors also caused heavy casualties. However, the most formidable enemies within their ranks were the Black Judges themselves in their cybernetic armor akin to a dreadnought. Although the legionaries managed to take them down with melter guns and crack grenades, for every Black Judge that fell, a dozen Iron Warriors would fall at their hand. Perturabo himself joined the battle after analysing the capabilities and combat patterns of the Black Judges, using his preternatural analytic mind to predict their movements and systematically crush them. Finally, the Black Judges were exterminated and the Meritara cluster fell under the control of the Iron Warriors. Perturabo exchanged the Black Judges' technological secrets to the Mechanicus in return for support in subsequent campaigns, and eventually the orbital docks of the Rock of Judgment were brought all the way to Olympia's orbit to produce ships for the Legion. In many cases, the extermination of a human civilization during the Great Crusade was a great tragedy that could often have been avoided. But in the case of the Black Judges, I think we can all agree that the galaxy is a better place without them. Nurth was another lost human colony discovered during the Great Crusade on a desert world. This society barely possessed pre-industrial technology. However, when they refused to join the Imperium, they managed to resist the Imperial forces and the Alpha Legion for quite some time. This was mainly because the Nurth, the inhabitants of this world, were chaos worshippers and possessed warp-based weaponry that was quite devastating, which the Imperials couldn't explain or counteract. For example, one of the weapons that caused the most problems for the Imperial forces was their quote-unquote magic air, a kind of multicolour hailstorm with explosive projectiles. This magic air was so devastating that it could even damage Imperial Titans and made air support for Imperial forces completely impossible. In addition, this world presented other curiosities. Artificial alien structures created by the Xenos known as the Cabal, such as the port of Monlo, which at first glance looked like a normal city, but upon closer inspection was discovered to be a completely artificial area that served as a giant landing platform or space facility / stopping station for the Cabal. This structure was 11,827 years old, and when it was discovered by the Imperials, it had been partially flooded by the ocean due to disuse. However, this wasn't the only unusual structure on the world. The area surrounding the village known as Tel Kat was littered with old, weathered diorite sculptures in the shape of human heads of all sizes, from pebbles to large rocks. In addition, the colours of the planet itself seemed somewhat unnatural, the ground a combination of strong reds and oranges, while the sky was an intense, vibrant blue. This, added to the glare of the desert, caused disorientation and eye damage to the Imperial forces, forcing them to equip anti-glare lenses in order to operate normally. It was during this campaign for Imperial compliance on Nurth that the Alpha Legion came in contact with the Cabal and were subsequently convinced to join Horus with the ultimate goal of defeating Chaos. Spoiler, didn't end well. Anyway, the Cabal warned the Alpha Legion that Nurth was about to unleash a chaotic weapon that will completely destroy the world, and so, taking heed of their warning, the Alpha Legion withdrew their forces from the planet. Despite Alpharius' warnings, the Imperial army continued its attack as it saw victory within reach and did not believe in the enemy's supposed magic. Thus, the Nurth unleashed the Black Cube, which through unknown means altered the planet's very climate, turning the air into toxic vapors that were totally hostile to any form of life, causing winds so strong that they ravaged the Earth until the bedrock was exposed, and raising the temperature so high until the oceans boiled. The Imperial army forces realized the situation too late, and most were eliminated in the process. And so, the Nurthine exterminated themselves in a final act of defiance against the Imperium, and overnight, Nurth was completely devastated, leaving the planet as a floating dead rock. The world of Thranx was another lost human colony that prospered during the Old Night. Its civilization had advanced to the point of surrounding its planet with a metal dome that provided an artificial atmosphere, certainly a milestone in mega engineering and a demonstration of the level achieved during the Dark Age of technology. This world was eventually liberated and annexed to the Imperium like so many others. However, during the Horus Heresy, it was assaulted by traitor forces where more than 1 million soldiers died in a single day of bloody combat. Over the millennia, Thranx was eventually infected by a gene-stealer cult and subjected to exterminatus. Galaspar, I'm not sure how this one is pronounced, but I'm going to go with Galaspar because it sounds cooler. Anyway, Galaspar was another human colony settled during the Dark Age of technology. Its enormous hive cities even rivaled those of the Segmentum Solar, and like every hive world, its industry over millennia had turned the planet's surface into a hellhole of pollution and contamination. During the Age of Strife, the population of Galaspar fell under the yoke of the tyrants simply known as the Order, who repressed the population into working for them without end, and when they could work no longer, the Order simply disposed of them. The Order kept the population under control with a mixture of terror and highly addictive drugs, which gradually turned the population into a weak and obedient mass. Over time, the Order would expand its influence to other systems, establishing its own mini-stellar empire. When the Empire of Galaspar encountered scout ships from the Imperium of Man, they refused to join the Imperium and fired on them. The Imperium answered in brute force, deploying the Legiones Astartes, the Death Guard, led by their primarch Mortarion. Swiftly, Mortarion and the Death Guard arrived in system, and after destroying their defenses in the void, raced at full speed towards the capital world. There, 11,000 Death Guard disembarked on the main hive city and began slaughtering any slave that the Order threw at them, men, women, and children alike. The slaves' weapons did little damage to the Astartes' power armor. However, the Death Guard saw it fit to deploy phosphex bombs to sow terror and devastation in their wake. And if you ask me, that's just going a tad too far. I don't know, like using an atomic bomb on a coughing baby. But oh well, at the end of the day, this is the Death Guard we're talking about. Shortly thereafter, they took control of the Hive City, and the Legion's tech marines were able to take control of the orbital defense platforms, allowing the rest of the fleet to approach safely and deploy even more forces onto the planet. Determined to repel this invader at any cost, the Order unleashed tens of millions of soldiers and thousands of tanks from the rest of its Hive cities. Which turned out to be a huge mistake, because with your soldiers all neatly packed together and in open terrain, the Death Guard simply bombarded them from orbit and wiped them out. Subsequently, the Legion set out to surround and besiege the rest of the Hive cities. Mortarion ignored any offers of surrender. The Order reminded him of the cruel tyrants of his home planet of Barbarous, and he would not rest until he had slayed all of them. At the end, all the defenders of the world were purged by the Death Guard. However, the Legion did also suffer heavy casualties, including their first captain Antavus Barazin. When the Imperial fleets arrived to take control of the planet, they were repulsed by the scale of the massacre carried out by the Death Guard. However, after such a display of brutality, the rest of the worlds of the Galaspar Empire surrendered without resistance. As for the civilians, they didn't seem to be too happy about their liberation, as they knew now they would simply be under the yoke of a new master. The Brotherhood of Ruin was a rather violent human civilization of abhumans whose forces consisted of cyborgs and orc mercenaries. In other words, the most vile kind of scum you can find, mutants and xenos working together. Definitely a 2-for-1 on the heresy bingo. The Brotherhood of Ruin had the brilliant idea of attacking Adeptus Mechanicus station known as Sarum. At first, everything was going well. They had penetrated the underground stations of the Mechanicum, and the orcs and cyborg mutants were wreaking havoc. It was at this point that Angron and the World Eaters arrived in system. While Angron's fleet fought a battle with the thousands of ships of the Brotherhood of Ruin in orbit, a massive deployment of 15,000 World Eaters was launched to the surface. The concentrated discharge of thousands of drop pods caught the cyborgs and orcs off guard, killing thousands in the process and sowing chaos and confusion among their ranks. As you would expect, the World Eaters didn't really bother with elaborate tactics, artillery, or heavy fire, but instead threw themselves into hand-to-hand combat against the enemy, and the orcs joined the party, relishing the prospect of a good fight. Meanwhile, the cyborgs of the Brotherhood of Ruin didn't really enjoy this bloody mindless slaughter as much and retreated to their strongholds. The battle raged for hours. Both orcs and World Eaters suffered heavy casualties in a bloody display of brute force. Rivers of blood and guts staining the surface of the planet. Seeing the casualties inflicted on the World Eaters, the warlords of the Brotherhood of Ruin saw victory within their grasp and gathered their forces from the rest of the planet for one last great offensive. When the World Eaters faced an endless horde of orcs, cyborgs, colossal robots and enemy tanks, all seemed lost. However, in that moment, several cyclonic torpedoes fell on the forces of the Brotherhood of Ruin, and hundreds of aircrafts arrived with reinforcements from the World Eaters to join the battle, led by Angron himself. The Primarch led the World Eaters, carving a bloody trail in his wake, while the Titans of the Legio Audax destroyed the colossal robots of the Brotherhood. The Orcs, in a state of wild abandonment, turned on each other, and the Brotherhood's cyborg forces were decimated by the World Eaters. With victory within reach, the forces of the Mechanicum of Sauron left their facilities to join the battle and expel these barbarians from their world. In true World Eater style, their slaughter would continue until not a single enemy remained on the planet's surface. And so, at least Angron did one thing right. He purged an aggressive human civilization that, in addition to being mutants, collaborated with aggressive Xenos. And finally, we arrive at the Diasporex. The fate of the Diasporex is perhaps the most tragic of all the human civilizations encountered by the Imperium during the Great Crusade. The Diasporex were a civilization of humans and Xenos who lived and worked together in harmony, living on their enormous spaceships as nomads who moved from one system to another to escape the calamities of old night. The Diasporex were quite unique in that they were a peaceful civilization, a democratic confederation between humans and Xenos who collaborated together and lived side by side. The Xenos of the Diasporex Confederation were large, four-legged, eyeless beings who had cybernetic implants installed in their bodies to augment their capabilities. And sadly, that's pretty much all we know about the appearance of these Xenos. However, the peaceful life of the Diasporex would come to a tragic end when they were discovered by the 10th Legion of the Iron Hands and Ferrus Manus. At first, the Iron Hands offered the humans of the Diasporex the chance to free themselves from the Xenos and join the Imperium of Man, but they rejected the offer. Having lived peacefully with their Xenos allies for centuries, perhaps even millennia, they would not abandon them now. And since for the Imperium the only good Xenos is a dead Xenos, the Iron Hands set upon destroying the Diasporex, as the Xenos could present a threat to the Imperium. The Iron Hands soon discovered that the Diasporex ships were not easy to destroy. As being a nomadic spacefaring civilization, the Diasporex were highly skilled in void warfare. Furthermore, the Diasporex didn't seek conflict with the Iron Hands, but avoided them wherever possible, escaping or evading detection to escape the wrath of the Astartes. Finally, the Iron Hands requested the aid of the Emperor's children, and Fulgrim noticed something in the Diasporex movement patterns, deducing that they always remained in the same sector for some reason. And soon they would discover that the Diasporex fleets used hidden space stations to refuel. With this information, their strategy was clear, and they systematically destroyed their fuel stations in order to flush the Diasporex out of hiding and force them to open battle. In the ensuing battle, the Diasporex were finally defeated by the joint efforts of the Iron Hands and Emperor's Children. During a boarding action on their capital ship, it was Solomon Demeter of the Emperor's Children who reached the bridge of the enemy flagship and slayed the Diasporex Xenos captain, whose last words were, "We only wished to be left alone." The Xenos population of the Diasporex were systematically purged, while the humans, for having collaborated with Xenos, were captured and used as slaves in forced labor in the nearest Imperial colony. The technologies of this lost branch of mankind would be studied by the Mechanicus, who remained to study their ships to unravel as many secrets of the Dark Age as they could. Now, I know what most of you are thinking. Haha, they deserved it for being filthy Xenos, the stars are of mankind, bolter go boom. And sure, yeah, but outside of the meme, the Diasporex didn't deserve such an end. Humans and Xenos appeared to live in harmony in the depths of space, traveling from one place to another without harming anyone. Two completely different species united by the horror of the old night, striving to create a better life where they could live peacefully. Who knows if given time these Xenos would have indeed turned against their fellow humans, or if they would have continued living their peaceful lives without turning hostile towards mankind. However, the Imperium could not tolerate Xenos species, as peaceful as they might seem, for history had taught them not to trust the Xenos. Sooner or later, they would always turn against mankind to inflict unspeakable horror and suffering. The tragic fate of the Diasporex is but the terrible price of the Great Crusade, the innocent suffering for the guilty. The Diasporex only wished to be left alone, but ultimately only found the unrelenting fires of the Great Crusade. Right, we're going to leave it here. I think that's enough for now. If you liked the video and wish to learn more about the independent human civilizations of the Great Crusade, leave a like and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you all again in the next video.